Warning, this cartoon contains material that may be necessary for information or clues to complete this game. Please be sure to check your inventory if you decide to skip.
Hello, this is Flat Art Show. This is a conversation with Meredith Gran, Gran. You can find her work in video games at perfect-tides.com and her work in comics at octopuspie.com. Incidental music and sound credits are at the end of the program. Okay, see you.
It's so hot. Looks like you have 3 beach clothes. The moon's so full. Wow! And all a pumpkin.
I made the mistake of, over a very short period of time recently, rereading and reading through all of Octopus Pie with like a greater intensity and focus than I had done before. So all that I want to talk to you about is this, like, it's such a fucking incredible thing, and all I want to talk to you about is that, but...
Oh, and I'm so over it, like, I don't...
And it's so old now.
It's so old.
So I, we'll try to make do without an exclusive focus on that.
Sure,
but,
sure.
I'm sure it'll come up. But I guess I'm interested in, like, what the shift has been like, because you finished that in, like, 2017, mostly.
Yes.
What's your trajectory into video games?
Oh, man.
From there? Well,
it was all just, it all dovetailed perfectly with the way my entire life changed. That year that was my first year out of Brooklyn, and I was, I think I was 30 or 31, and just like, I knew all of this had to end with Octopus Pie. I'd kind of been landing the ship for a while, but I didn't know what the after would look like. I was kind of just like, venturing forth into the unknown. And when I ended the strip, very shortly after that, I feel like I kind of put the whole thing to bed. I released the last book, and if you've ever worked with a publisher and made a book, you might know that feeling when the book comes out that everything is dead and there was no point to any of it. That was my experience, and I kind of like. I don't know that anything would have ever been enough for me, but I kind of felt like, when it all wrapped up, I did things the way I wanted, but I wasn't going to get the reaction that I wanted from it. And I was really kind of just ready to walk away from all of it and find, find the next big thing. It had been 10 years of this. And so I got pregnant like a couple months later. And at that time, I was just like kind of messing around with Adventure Game Studio, which is this engine that basically makes the exact video game I've always wanted to make, which is just like a shitty King's Quest game that I just loved from the 90s so much. And, as soon as I started playing with it, I saw, this is actually very easy. And now I guess I can think about, what kind of stories do I actually want to tell now that I am thinking about this in terms of potentially making a video game. And I kind of just like floated around, a few like sort of fanciful ideas that I'd had over the years that, maybe I thought I could, that maybe sort of related to the idea of like, what feels powerful. What sort of power do I want to harness and put in the player's hands? And the more I thought about it and the more I wrote about it, the more I really just wanted it to be about my own life and like what I saw as reality, and not necessarily about any higher concept than that. And I guess that's what I was doing with Octopus Pie, that I kind of felt like I was no longer able to do. Because once I entered 30, I started to feel like, something was obviously over, and my 30s seemed kind of faceless to me at that time. I didn't really know what it meant to be that age. So I had not collected enough information to even consider, like, what kind of stories can I tell about the now? So what I really wanted to do at that point was to tell stories about experiences I've had that I've never told, but also, like, I've kind of never really thought about. When I started thinking about what it was like to be a teenager, I kind of had, like, these sort of flattened out, abstracted memories of, like, embarrassments and victories, but with the caveat that I was stupid and it was stupid and it didn't matter and it's stupid. And the more I kind of worked through those ideas and the more I took the time to remember them, the more I kind of started to see it her way, like see it my way in that age. And the more immediate, in a way that Octopus Pie had seemed immediate, the past started to seem. And at that point, I found it very easy to start, recollecting these stories from another age, and sort of filtering them in that choice aesthetic way that I'm always trying to filter them. So I guess. I guess I didn't really even talk about this in terms of video games, honestly. Like, I feel like I'm kind of just working through the idea of, like, how I made this the thing that fascinated me in the way that Octopus Pie did. And
that's the engine of it. Whatever the case, it's only going to work if it's a thing that you can get obsessed enough with, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there was sort of an in-between period between Octopus Pie and Perfect Tides where I did freelance, and I felt like I was putting my best efforts into freelance projects, but at the same time, like, my definition of good for those things would just never ever be my definition of, like, my own personal work, what it needs to be in order to be good. And like you say, you got to be obsessed with it. You got to pick at it like it's like a ragged little piece of skin that you just can't leave alone. But
also, like, you're taking enormous weird swings throughout Octopus Pie in particular that aren't compatible with any sort of contract work. Like, no. you wouldn't be experimental in that same sort of way, because it wouldn't, the returns wouldn't be guaranteed or something.
No, you get, you're just kind of setting yourself up to get paid for less by creating things that are going to not get approved or are going to be needed a different way. So there was always a limit to how much I was able to offer to other people's projects. And you're just always going to be staking so much more on your ability to deliver quality with your own ideas. It's just like, it's always going to be the most important thing. And, something serviceable to me is a waste of life, when it comes to making your own work. It would just, if you're not feeling it deep down and just, like, waking up and going to bed needing to do it, then there's really no point to it.
Oh, man. Awesome. I have a couple angles I wanted to touch on with that. It's interesting that you focus on the idea of power in thinking about making a game, which I guess makes sense. I mean, the reader or the player having power is the defining thing. But then the story is so much about Mara's, power occupying an extremely limited space.
Yeah.
And then also, as a medium, it's you're limited by these particular sort of dated conventions of what feels to me, I mean, I'm not as familiar with the medium, so what feels to me like a much more sort of, power limiting way of storytelling and participating in a story than comics, for example. That was just an interesting thought I had.
Yeah, I mean, no, absolutely. Like the character is pretty powerless. Like she does have like a very small amount of power, which she then makes foolish choices with a lot of the time. Squanders it, and the player doesn't really have any control over that, or the circumstances that they've been given. I suppose the power for me in that game is it's I guess it's sort of like a therapeutic power where you're experiencing humiliating, painful things, but in like a controlled environment where you can kind of like press pause and examine every facet of it and like what this means to you and how it hurt you. And like I think that may be the power that the game possesses, is that it isolates those moments and gives you the space to examine them when these things were happening to you, when you had no power. You kind of just had to keep going with it, and were blindsided by it. So I think that's probably what I sought to do in writing the story. To sort of to use kind of buzzy words to like sort of reclaim some of those painful thoughts. And then I seek to present that to the player as like, would you like to experience these again with me? I think we might have fun talking about it and thinking about it together. I don't know. It is a
little harrowing and embarrassing. I relate to the feelings. I remember them really way too distinctly.
Yeah, I wasn't sure that. I don't think that I did. At least like I didn't at first, and I had to kind of uncover them from deep storage. And by the time I did, I was like, okay, well, I haven't really brushed this one off in quite a few years, so perhaps I have a new perspective I can bring to that now.
Yeah. Okay, this is something that I was thinking about a lot, rereading the comic, and I regret that I could not play the game, but watching a lot of the playthrough of the game. Octopus Pie is about people being a particular age in a particular moment in time. The sort of low resolution NPR interview line of questioning would be to ask you how much of all this is autobiographical or whatever. I don't want to do that. But what's interesting to me, though, is that you are telling these different stories different stories of people, reaching moments in their life that are tied to your historical passage through time. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like the yes. thought of telling a Perfect Tide story about a 15-year-old now would be I could not imagine writing that as a 37-year-old, however old I am. So like, how inextricably tied do these things feel to? Is that a useful line of thinking? Because like, I think about both of us have taught this class, the exact same class at SVA, where I'm trying to talk through like web comics as some sort of viable career thing, but my conception of that is locked in my autobiographical memory of a particular moment that no longer exists.
Yes, that no longer exists. Yeah, I mean, for sure. But I think I can kind of summon the significance of it, at least in broad strokes.
Yeah.
There were certain, like, I would say, stories like that where you could literally take something that happened to one of the characters, and I could say that some version of that happened to me. But I think more typically what would happen is I would be thinking about, a theme. There would be some sort of idea that I was kind of contemplating in my life. And every character in Octopus Pie would take on some facet of my own thinking about that, the ways in which my thinking conflicted with itself. Mm-hmm. And, there'd be some point of views of maybe some of the people in my life to throw in with that. But I think by and large, I kind of zeroed in on the ensemble cast that became kind of the main cast that by the end of the story you could count on just about every one of those characters being involved in the story. And I would kind of just give to each of them some part of this thing that I was fixated on in the moment. So none of them could be separated from me and, you know, the real things going on in my mind, even if literally, you know, the stories are like, you know, a little bit silly and over the top, or they're, you know, they're so specific to those characters and where those characters are in the story that it couldn't be me. But at the same time, if I look back at it, a lot of the time, I guess you were reading it along with, were you reading the version with the commentary that I did a few years ago, or were you going in? Were you?
I underwent a fairly deep reading. I read a whole bunch of the recent commentary, which is interesting to see.
Yeah, I think a lot of those strips, as I was reading them, I was kind of remembering where I was at with it and why this was important to me. But you know, any given strip, at the time there was something I was obsessed with that I was putting into that, and increasingly so as the strip went on. I think, you know, as I got into the stories where people, like, you know, seemed to agree the comic took a turn and went from kind of like a you know, a goofy roommate comedy to something more serious. At that point, any story I was telling was sort of my own little octopus pie version of what I was fixated upon at the time.
How it seems really like brilliant and intentional how you were able to fluidly give yourself the space to do that. But that can't still be the case when you're working in a medium like a video game, right? Like improvisation must take a very different. You have to. You're working on completing this one big technical story that all gets out there at once. How is that? That feels like a thing that must seem very different to you than the experience of like serializing, improvising with Octopus Pie.
Oh yeah, no, it's much more it's much more involved, and like, yeah, there's nothing quite like in comics where, like, you know, I would write out a script and I would sketch it out, and while I'm doing that, I'm writing new lines and I'm doing new drawings, and those things end up in the comic, and I thought of them, you know, 5 seconds before the comic was finished, and then they end up in the final thing. But there are versions of that in games, and, you know, the process of games is iterative. So you start with bare bones, and then you just build on top of the skeleton until you've got the polished game. So at this point, I've iterated on the whole story, like the entire game, about 3 times. And every time I look back at it, I'm like, oh, this sucks, or like, this needs to be funny. And that's when the funny thing will come.
You're talking, you're talking about the new game you're doing. The sequel.
Yes. And yeah, I would say, like, the first game kind of, I wasn't as streamlined with this process, but I was definitely working this way, where a lot of the time the thing that needed to be improvised was improvised. I did another iteration of a scene where I'm like, this just isn't humming the way it needs to be. And, you know, do a quick rewrite and get the thing that you want. And then I would put a lot of rough artwork into the game, a lot of like very loose, like pixely little drawings where I was just trying to get the feel. And by the time I get to like the cleaning stage, I really try to keep as much of that drawing in place, like, you know, the way you get like the most energy from the first drawing in a comic. I'm still able to achieve that somewhat with games. You know, you got to look for the ways to do it. It's really not as straightforward as like that just loose, free energy of making comics, but it is there if you want it. And I agree that that's where I think that's where the good stuff comes from, not laboring endlessly over a single idea or a single illustration.
I mean, and a lot of this is that you're working within a type of game that has a lot of room to foreground that stuff, like being able to put in little illustrated moments that are like drawings, and little animated things. That's cool. I feel it feels like you have, made the space your own in an interesting way.
It's a fun process. I mean, it takes forever, and that part is hard, but I don't care. I mean, I think it no longer matters if something takes forever. At a certain point, you either trust yourself to finish a project or you don't, and the length of time it takes eventually will be justified.
This is not something that you probably thought years and years ago when you were early on in trying to be an independent comics person, however, right?
No, not at all. The whole ethos was make something small, make something quick. And even now, I hear that stuff all the time. And I understand who that advice is for. It's for people who've never made anything before. Just make something small. Don't try to make your opus. Don't try to make the big thing. Don't build the world. Just make something to get you going, right? And at a certain point, I don't actually have time to make something small anymore. I feel like as agonizing as it is to be patient and put years into a project and know that like people are going to see basically none of it, as little of it as I can stand until it's done. That's worth it because it's actually going to mean that that I have something to offer that will surprise them in ways that it was not possible to do when I was giving them something every day. So I'm happy about that, and I'm happy about just the idea of building a library. I mean, drawing a comic for 10 years is one way to do that, but making something over many years that people are going to appreciate, I think potentially more deeply than the work I've done before. That's what I'm into right now.
What do they think? I mean, how's it going with Perfect Cards?
Oh, it's incredible. It's so amazing. I wish I could convey like people have engaged deeply with the comics over the years, and that has been it has been very gratifying to hear what people think of the comic, of their experience reading the comic, but their experience playing the game is like when they describe it to me, they're saying, and then the part where I went to the thing and I did this and I talked to this person, and they are speaking personally about an experience that you created for them. And there are ways to do that in comics, but I have never quite had I've never seen an audience interface with my work in this particular way, like they did, they've done with this game. I would have to stand over a person's shoulder while they read the comic out loud and reacted to it in real time to get even a small picture of what I'm getting, seeing people play my game. When I first started seeing people stream the game, that's when I first started to understand how different this experience was for people.
Oh, yeah, I forgot that's the whole part of this. People playing the thing where you can watch it live. Mm-hmm. That's wild. Does this I just want to understand more what motivated your thinking in terms of a totally different medium. Was this a thing that you were thinking about in advance of releasing Perfect Tides, like that you wanted this kind of richer, more first-personal engagement?
No, not at all. I had no idea. I was just like, I thought it would be cool to make a video game, and then I set out to do it. And fortunately, I had a lot of fun doing it because it took twice as long as I thought it was going to take. More than twice, and I, it took up every spare minute I had, while I was also forming a baby and in my body and then raising it from birth. I took the few spare hours I had in my week and worked on this game. I did not anticipate at all what the end result would be and how people would react to it. I just kind of hoped they would like it.
So the Perfect Tides came out like a couple years ago, and you're coming up on releasing the second one?
The second one's got probably about another year in the tank, but it is getting pretty close to the playtesting stage, which means that in a few months, I believe I'm just a few months away from people playing it and telling me if it's fun or not.
What is this like industrially? I mean, like what is what the space in which you are putting these things, the industry in which you are now participating? How does it compare to comics to you? Is that too broad a question?
Oh, no. It's great. I don't get to talk about this very often, but the game industry is crazy. And I mean, to be fair, I have not personally been in comics. My husband Mike is still in comics, and I see the world that he is in. But in terms of the world that I came from, which is independent comics, I've been out of the loop for a few years. But from what I remember, there was not a lot of money to be made. But if you were industrious and perhaps an early adopter, then you could make a living in comics. And the only investment you would have to make is in time and, a few pieces of Bristol board and some pens. Video games, the upfront investment is inevitably massive. I mean, even with developer tools, you are going to end up paying for labor because it is just not really like a solo developer is going to eat up a decade of their lives trying to make a game, and I absolutely needed help. So to make a video game, you pretty much do need a budget. And if you don't need a budget, you pretty much need somebody else to be making a living in your home because you're going to need to give all of your time to it. And in comics, I do feel like the channels for distribution are they've gotten worse and they've gotten better in some ways, but there still exists a wide variety of ways to sell your comic. In video games, yes, there's itch and GOG, but the be all end all is Steam. It absolutely dominates the entire market. And the long and short of it is, if you want your game to be any sort of a commercial success, or for more than a couple hundred people to ever see it, your game needs to succeed on Steam. And that is the thing that every game developer agonizes over on a daily basis for years before the release of their game, is getting those wish lists and getting those eyeballs on their game in every way possible and just directing people to their Steam page. I frankly find it disgusting. It is the worst part of my day, the worst part of my job. But I find that far more than when I was in comics, I need to advocate for my game and explain to people what my game is, because they're not going to be able to read 2, 3, 4, 500 pages of it and decide for themselves. Mm-hmm. They're going to have to buy the game, or they're going to have to download the demo. And there are 500 demos that just came out today that also look kind of cool to them. Oh it is incredibly difficult to stand out in the world of gaming. There's more money than God floating around, but for the most part, individuals and little developers are not getting that money, and the AAA studios, who also happen to be massively laying off their employees, are getting that money. So it is a much more menacing industry than the one I came from. It's frightening, extremely high stakes, and very, very little chance of success. However, it it's simply the form that I believe in right now. So I don't really know what to do about that. I really just try to keep my head down and exist in that world right now.
I mean, it's wild how much of it is bounded by like one platform and divining the ways that promotion can work on that one platform just circumstantially. That is horrible. and I mean, it's not like the world that you came from in comics, but I mean, everything, I guess, has probably become a little more like that, a little more desperate, precarious, and platformized.
Yeah.
There's just less money in comics generally, so maybe the dynamics are still different.
Yeah, I mean, I don't imagine it's very easy to get a table at SPX at this point. Like, if you haven't been grandfathered in, we can use that word to describe ourselves at this point,
I use
right?
it all the time.
I imagine there's a lot of competition to get a table at any of the small press shows that a lot of people know about that have been around for a while.
I mean, SPX pointedly does the lottery to account for a large amount of the tables there as a deliberate stop against that tendency,
Yes.
which is cool.
Yes.
But it's like does it just come down to like, particular individual decisions like that against the grandfathering in tide?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky. Like, if the show scales up, then it runs the risk of becoming another con. And they've been in that same space for so many years, much to people's frustration. But it does keep it from getting any bigger. But at the same time, I imagine every year there's more people trying to get into that. And I'm actually in a show. I'm in a Steam show right now. It's just a digital festival. I shouldn't say just, because this is the main way that game developers promote their games right now. And there are 35 games in the showcase, and I was told that that they received 500 applications for those spots, and that's not uncommon. And I am rejected from most of the festivals that I submit to. So I don't really know. Well, I guess we're not talking about advice right now. We're talking about whether this is hard or not. Right?
Oh yeah, I don't know. I just want to explore the space. We're not. This isn't teacher mode.
Yeah, right. God, just flying right back into that at the slightest provocation.
It's hugely affected how I think about this stuff too. I am just in my third semester doing it now, and it has really changed how I get sucked into it, just like you're saying. In particular, it has helped me, I think, not think so bleakly and conclusively about things, like talking about how these different creative spaces have become so, dominated and platformized. Mm-hmm. It's really easy as just an individual person who has a functional career, just probably because it predated that, to feel total despair about it. But it's been productive to me to try to figure out what actually can be done. How can people engage with it, engage with the world as it is now, even while honestly understanding that bleak status quo.
Yes, no, it has gotten bad, but at the same time, they're not going to do the same things that we did, and we may not be able to guide them directly to the path that we took. That's impossible. But if they're industrious and they get what they need out of our guidance, if we're talking about teaching them, then they'll get there. And it's a little difficult teaching in university because you would love to think that they'll all get there, and that's also not really like something you can count on. But the ones who want it the most, I think, will get there, and if nothing else, they will create something that's worth celebrating.
Oh man, I feel like we're jumping around too much. I'm sorry, I just keep getting sidetracked. We have all these
okay.
fucking angles.
All right, well, fuck the kids. Let's stop talking about them. That'll help eliminate some of this stuff.
Yeah, okay. Well, we were talking about industry seeming different, but you didn't do that much in comics within like the formal industry, right? You never really got into the creator-owned graphic novel boom, did you?
No, I did not. Mostly because I have not yet had a YA story in me.
That is what they want.
Yeah, they really want the YA story, and I wish I did, because the best ones I've read, and my son reads a lot of them, so I'm reading a lot of them these days. The best ones are clearly from a place of full emotional investment, and I'm not there yet. It'd be cool to do that someday, but every time I've looked at it and asked myself if I could thrive in that particular pocket of the industry, the answer continues to be no.
It's just funny to look at. I mean, it's funny to look at, like, you and I started doing self-published comics in a aesthetically very different but philosophically similar, I think, way at around exactly the same time. You talked about it as art by any means necessary in something you wrote recently that I don't have handy.
Might have been a blog post.
It's funny to see this trajectory because, I mean, a lot of people find various ways of, they see their trajectory through self-published material as a means of building something more stable and institutional. And you were just committed to this big fucking... I guess you didn't know how big it would be, but you just stuck to this enormous, pretty weird, idiosyncratic, messy and variable and difficult to reliably print project. And it's just it's a cool trajectory. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if it's for everyone. I think I have kind of, followed my impulses and been lucky enough to land on my feet while doing that. Octopus Pie was supplemented by other work over the years. There weren't many consecutive years where I wasn't doing some other job while also working on Octopus Pie. But it was my real job, Yeah. It was the one I cared about the most at all times, and at a certain point, I knew I needed to end it not because I wasn't feeling that way about it anymore, but because I felt it had taken up such an enormous chunk of my life that I needed to start over, because when I started over with Octopus Pie, it was a jump for me, and I knew that if I ever did that again, it would be another jump.
What do you mean when you started over?
Well, I made a few like bad webcomics before I made Octopus Pie.
But that was in practically childhood. That doesn't count.
Yes. Yeah. It's true, but I feel like a fresh start is good for anybody. They can look at things, maybe on a day-to-day basis their process hasn't changed much, but they can look at things holistically with all the experience that they've built. Starting a new game meant that I could look at all the game design that I have accumulated, like all of the knowledge I've accumulated on that front through my mistakes, and I could start with that foundational understanding of those things. And I felt that way about Octopus Pie, that I just I had learned enough about comics to know how to pace a comic and make sure it reads clearly and make sure the characters are distinct and things like that. And then through the process of drawing it, I learned how to like actually allow my voice to come through and not just make a technically a syndication ready comic strip. And then by the time I was ready to move on from that, I was ready to just like cry into a new form, like just fill a new form with tears.
Mm-hmm. That's a funny way of putting it. There's some enormous cathartic thing that is motivating everything that I've ever seen you make. So that's a funny way of putting it. It's I kind of relate to it. There's a lot of ways that like there's a lot of ways I relate to that, but formally we've done totally different things. I feel like that's great to be able to pursue that feeling into another medium, though, and to actually accomplish the fucking thing. It's exciting. I don't know what else to say.
Have you ever considered taking your work to another form?
I don't know. I mean, there was a while when I was obsessed with, like, I wanted something that moved, but I've become so committed to comics, and I, with Third Voice, like, I mean, finishing Vatu, which is the thing that occupied that chunk of my, span of autobiographical time that Octopus Pie occupied for you. After I finished that, I went through this weird fugue of figuring out how to double down or commit to what I wanted to make, and I relate to what you're saying about not having the YA thing in me, and I don't know that I could make something within comics that fits into the industrial circumstances, really. So all I could do is just commit in the way that I knew that I sort of reasonably could. Mm-hmm. So I've doubled down in that kind of way over the past 2 years, I guess. That's all I'm interested in, really.
I mean, I honestly think maybe over a much longer period of time, doubling down on your own thing is just as good of a bet as pitching a bunch of shit to the publisher that you think they might like.
I mean, probably a better bet is where I've landed, probably.
Yeah, because unseen work is such a waste, like a million pitches cannot compare to like the worst thing I've ever drawn. Like if it was actually finished, then it was better. And if you carve out your own identity, then if all you've done is make the work you wanted to make, then that's already a victory over pitching and rejection. But I think there's a good chance that if you're doing the thing that you're doing, people are going to notice it in time, and they're going to acknowledge you, hopefully in the way that you wanted.
Mm-hmm. So is in doing games, you are interfacing with these big, horrible institutional machines, but it's still self-publishing, right? Like it's work that you do. You own the means of production in a way. It's work that you do with no guarantee of returns, but you make all the money that is made off of it. So
yes,
that's cool. That's been a real fucking through line.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like I don't have a publisher, and that's another thing that game developers kind of suffer under is the heavy hand of the publisher, because they finance the game. And they, a lot of games that come out that, the players complain seem rushed, that they're not fulfilling the promise of the original game. A lot of the time that's, the publisher's thumb on the scale, deciding that the game simply must ship. Mm-hmm. And I've been very lucky to not rely on that. And it has allowed me to make choices that perhaps nobody would have ever advised me to do, but that the players certainly like, and I'm proud of.
Are you Do you see yourself as like an ideologue about that stuff? Like, were you? I see that as proceeding from your history in self-publishing comics. When you started Octopus Pie, that was just kind of a thing that we did. Now it's ideological.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're taking a stand against institutions or whatever. But what do you?
Well, it's I think by and large I skew way more ideological in that direction, where I'm just like, this was the right choice. It was the only choice at the time. I was not going to get syndicated, and there was a time where nobody wanted to publish me, and I made that choice, and what might seem like sort of in hindsight, like kind of a crabby, defensive manner, that like, oh, I'm going to just do my own thing. Nobody's going to help me. Nobody ever helped me. Nobody ever saw what I was doing. So, I guess there is a part of me that still kind of seizes onto that. Maybe that feeling of hurt dies hard.
Sure.
And then there's another part of me that's like, if I had done just one book with a publisher, I would have a fucking Eisner by now. And it's I mean, you have an Eisner.
I do not.
No, you don't. Were you nominated for an
I was
Eisner?
nominated for third voice, which is a wild, unexpected thing because, you're not visible to that crowd doing a self-published thing at all.
Right.
So,
right. It's incredible that makes me so happy that you were nominated.
I lost. I mean, for the record, I lost to the the most popular English language comic in the world, so I feel okay about it, I guess.
Lore Olympus, a published comic by the largest webcomic company.
Right.
If you want to win the award, you need to be published. And I look back on comics, and it's hard not to taste the salt of that one just a little bit. That if I had only been more willing to go that route, I probably would have that award. I'd probably be staring at it right now. And
But how fucking important is that? You got to, you made a fucking miraculous thing. It is it is unthinkable that somebody. I mean, how many people? Not even just like the scale and the execution of it, but like to have that chunk of one's life committed in such an intensive way to something that's that cohesive. I don't know, man. I mean, you wouldn't have been able to do that if you had been scrambling to just publish books with publishers.
I mean, you may be right. I mean, that probably is true, that the comic would not exist in the form that it does if I had been chasing that award. And there's no reality where I would have been chasing that award. I was going to do the thing that I was going to do. So it's not like there even is a would have, No,
I know, but it's these are the vectors at play in our thinking about this. Yeah.
Yes. I guess what I'm saying is that, like, sometimes that ideology that I still hold on to, I do pause and think, but damn it, if I wasn't such a crank, I would have the prestige in that industry that I did not have. And I don't know, maybe that's not true. Like, I do feel the honor of having made a comic in that world in other ways. I just have not stood on that stage at the hotel meeting room in San Diego and been presented with the award. I'm not going to pretend that the awards mean nothing to me, but I don't have any regrets for the way that I've done things. I mean, it would be silly to be regretful for that.
That's nice to hear. It would be silly, I think. Maybe this is cope, as they say, but like I don't know that any of our institutions in comics are terribly. How much do we really care about them? How significant are they really?
I would like to be serious. I remember a year when you and I both won an Ignatz Award,
Oh, yeah.
and we both went up to the stage and gave what I remember being very heartfelt, sincere acceptance speeches. And I'm not trying to besmirch any of the other people who won, but quite a few of the acceptance speeches were people just going up and being like, "Thank you," and running away, and kind of laughing at the whole premise of it, that we're getting a brick from Home Depot as an award.
Well, I mean, they do the laughing themselves, SPX, by making it a brick. So yeah.
Yes, absolutely. But I want to be serious. I want to make serious work in a serious medium, and I just happen to be making work in mediums where there are a lot of unserious people. I think that's why I care about the awards as much as I do.
Interesting. I think I don't know if I land the same place, but I mean, it would be great to be right. It would be great, of course, but I don't know that I landed exactly with at the same place. But I obviously take this stuff seriously. But video games it feels like a newer and less sort of artistically understood medium, but it still feels like a viable place to articulate these things with the scale and seriousness that interests you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually still working towards its peak. I feel like video games are. I mean, in some ways, they are getting worse. They're getting more bloated, and the content is getting less memorable. I hear so many people say that they play modern games for longer than they ever have before, and they remember less of what they experience in those games. So the games have gotten more streamlined and longer and more involved, but at the same time, they are not necessarily saying anything. But that's sort of like the trajectory of the AAA games right now. I think in independent games there actually is a lot of room for innovation still, and it excites me what people are doing with it. So I think this is not a medium in its infancy anymore, but I don't think it has fully seen its potential. And in the area where I'm working, I feel like narratively games have only begun to show their potential.
That feels true to me. I'm not super literate in that area, but I do understand what you're saying about. I mean, it seems like the AAA part of the industry is just technologizing and doubling down on all of the most like literalistic, creatively deadening habits, and all of that insane attention to like technical fidelity and high resolution and all this computing power. Maybe the independent space actually gets to reap benefits of the stuff in a smarter and more compelling way.
Yeah, I think so. There's never been so many engines with which to make games. So you're the amount you actually need to know in order to use these tools is it's not that it's really not that extensive. You can really just have a very rudimentary understanding of code, and that's enough to get you through just about any game engine. Then as people kind of like bail on some of the bigger engines, like Unity is kind of seeing a bit of an exodus from people as the company changes its policies. It feels like there's now more support for the more open source stuff like Godot and like the engines that kind of rely on support communities. There's a healthy number of people keeping those things up to date. So there's potential there. I certainly think so, and I hope so, because I don't want kids to have only the only benefit of these coding initiatives for kids to have been that they working terrible, low-paying tech jobs their whole lives. If you can tell a story through this medium, if you can express yourself through this medium, that is an incredible gift that you can give to yourself.
The hot sun and choking sands are taking their toll on Graham. He must drink, and soon. Ah, life-giving water, nectar of the gods. Graham can now feel strength and renewal flowing through him.
Okay, you were talking about going through a lot of promotional shit and how that's a big part of your new life in video games. What is that entailing exactly?
Well, I need to be on social media, which I really don't want to be anymore. I don't want to have to talk about myself. I would much prefer to talk about to talk through my work, and having an endless presence online mandates that you're always talking. The thing with like a video game is like, in order to get people to check it out, you basically have to, not just be seen by them one time. You have to be seen by them so many times that they're like, all right, already, what is this? And then that's when they'll check it out. And that means that you can't disappear for even like a day. You got to be moving the needle somewhere in your online world, which means that I'm spread out on like 10 different platforms at this point. And I don't love it. It takes up a lot of my time that I would much rather be spending either making a video game or being with my family. And it is, it's just sort of like, I mean, as much as I'm complaining here about a job that I really love so much, it just happens to be the least pleasant part of the work that I do. And
it doesn't have that. I assume the social media stuff doesn't have that that dimension of hanging out with your friends on the internet that it once
not
did.
at all. I mean, I don't know who it still does for. I mean, bless them if people are still feeling that way.
Some of the right wingers on Twitter are really getting a lot out of that. I think,
yeah, right. They're still having fun, but not me. Not me. I mean, there was a point where I think a lot of people realized that like Twitter was just kind of like, you weren't hanging out with your friends so much as like being surveilled by them while also surveilling them. And that just really kind of sucked the fun out of the whole thing for me. I don't even now, like, there are people who I love dearly who I just don't want to see what their anxieties are every day. And I don't think they would want me to see that either. And so I try not to look, it upsets me to see people in a constantly anxious state like that, even if I want to keep open communication with them. And it's hard to let go of those platforms because I miss a lot of those people, because that's the only way that I would talk to them. And I have not found, there are a lot of people for whom I just have not found another way to communicate, and have fallen away from my life. And, perhaps that's just what happens in middle age, that you just, you fall away from people and your life takes different directions. But I do regret that social media became such a primary way to keep in touch with people, because now that I've scaled back my use of it to purely business, I just I don't keep up with them like I used to.
Yeah. Okay, you said that thing. Maybe that's just what happens in middle age. Maybe it is. Maybe there's a lot of ways that we're behaving that is just how people age into behaving or whatever. But also the circumstances have fucking changed. And that's a thing that I think about a lot with a lot of this stuff is that, like, I was saying this earlier, but yes, our relationship to our trajectory through the work that we're doing changes, but also the circumstances have profoundly changed. So it's like all the old people are right to be snobby about all the stuff they're snobby about.
I mean, for sure, like things are not what they used to be. I think some people are talking about blue sky kind of feeling a little bit like Twitter used to feel when all the posts were literally in chronological order, when there was no artificial altering of the way that seemed natural for us to communicate. That certainly has had an effect on it. I think maybe they're deluding themselves a little bit, though, because the culture of how we communicate with each other Twitter has become such a big part of the way we think about talking to each other that I don't know that we can actually go back to that time where, like, there was like this very fertile time of Twitter in particular where, like, I was making real friends on there, and like it was like impacting my real life interactions because I was I had met so many people through that platform, and said yes to so many things because of that platform. The platform mediated a lot of those relationships for me for a really long time. And I don't know that that's possible anymore. Maybe if I was younger, it would be possible. It would be more possible. But it does feel like something fundamentally has changed about that. And it's not really possible to go back to kind of just like oversharing with no consequences.
Yeah, that's a part of it too. But I mean, I've said this before, but like a big part of it is that Twitter has been a just historically totally unique thing in terms of the scale and fidelity of communication, right? That's not going to happen. We have no guarantee that that's going to happen again.
No.
So whatever happens now, it's under a different logic.
No, I mean, you can go to TikTok where it's kind of taken into hyperdrive, but I don't know that anybody's making friends on there.
Okay, well, you're talking about needing to be on all these platforms to push the thing that you're doing. I sympathize, but this was not the case for you in comics, I guess, because of how you got grandfathered in, or how, or why, do you think?
I mean, when I think about what I used to do in comics, I definitely was promoting myself, and I think I enjoyed it more in those days. I was, I did not have as much of a personal life. My life was making comics, and talking about myself as a cartoonist was really no big deal. It didn't take away from any other aspect of my life because that was pretty much it. And so that definitely, on my part, has changed. However, most of the promotion I did was to post a new comic. Like, I had a new comic, I would post the new comic. I was not constantly like pinging people to remind them to check it out in multiple places.
Right.
It was on a website, and you were already subscribed to the RSS feed, or you were subscribed to the social media where it was posted. And I posted about it at one time, and you would find it. I feel like posting about something one time is like a pretty old thing at this point. And I think there was a period where I had to make that realization. I also, like, I never really talked in, like, what I would consider sort of just like marketing speak in those days. I was speaking from a very casual conversational tone, and in a way that kind of embarrasses me now when I think about it, where I was acting like I was kind of too cool to promote myself in a way. But I think I was riding a wave of attention that was much easier to get in those days because there were fewer things to read, and just being one of the highest percentile of webcomics that were read by a few thousand people was enough to build momentum and build more attention for the comic kind of on its own. There was an ecosystem there of creators who linked to each other and talked about each other and hung out with each other. And it all kind of, it carried us when we weren't promoting ourselves. We were promoting each other by association.
Yeah, that's a key fulcrum of my obnoxious history of webcomics lecture.
Uh-huh.
I would be interested to hear your entire correlate of that particular lecture from when you were teaching it. But so this thing about posting with the updates, that still feels like a fundamental thing to me, because you're not reminding people over and over again that this is something they can check out. You're reminding them just passively by adding a little bit to it that they can see every so often or whatever. Mm-hmm. So that I can see how that alone would make it a more stressful and obnoxious process. The dream to me always with any sort of promotional stuff like this is that, you do some amount of hustling on all these different spaces, but ideally you're just aiming for, making a thing that resonates with people so immediately and intensely that they have to.
It's undeniable.
Go find it immediately.
Yes.
Which maybe accounts for 1% of a given audience of a thing.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
That's the dream.
Right. That's how you imagine they're engaging with it. And, there was a time where, like, if something I did got a like on it or a fave on it, in my imagination, that was full engagement with the thing. And, like that person fully read it and they loved it and they felt they needed to remark on it in some way. It took me many years to realize that, like, that's just literally nothing. Like that little tick on the number is literally nothing. There's no value to that sort of engagement.
And then when you have something like an entire video game where people need to commit, if not money to buy the whole thing, then time in a demo, mm-hmm. the dynamics are totally different. Like you're asking more of them. So, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just walking through the stuff you've already said. But
well, yeah, no, I mean, that's high quality engagement right there. When a person mm-hmm. writes a review on Steam, which, by the way, if you don't have a certain number of reviews, Steam just buries you. You don't exist. But when somebody reviews your game, not only do they tell you how they felt about the game, but you see how many hours they've been playing it. And that number is, quite stirring for me. I'm in disbelief at the hours people are putting into the thing that I made, when hours are at such a premium and attention is at such a premium in this world.
So are you like, is this just a constant thing for you, this promoting for the game that's already out, or are you sort of ramping up for the forthcoming one?
I'm mostly talking about the forthcoming one, but I use the first game in, whatever opportunities I see to promote it. People talking about it. There's a new update. It becomes newly compatible for another platform. There's always chances to talk about it and get more eyes on it. And, every once in a while you just run a discount on it because there are, right now there's, I think, 16,000 people who just have it sitting in a wish list. So if I want to activate some of those people, and this is what I mean by like Steam being your whole fucking life. If I want to activate a few of those people, I just put it on sale and they'll buy it. And, you can kind of just poke the people who are interested and haven't pulled the trigger every once in a while. And, I suppose a developer who can make a certain number of games in their library can start to count on that as like a source of income long term, to just like constantly remind people to buy your game. for less than it's
that
worth.
is a large number.
I mean,
Tens of thousands of people is a large type of number.
yeah, I mean, that is the other thing. Like the amount of people who are around, well, I don't know. I don't know how many people are reading comics and buying comics. I mean, clearly there's a lot of kids buying comics. I don't know how many adults, like I don't know how large the pool of adults for comics is, but I always assumed it kind of caps in the tens of thousands and does not hit the millions like games do.
It feels that way in the English-speaking world. It feels that way. I mean, there's going to be the number of people reading stuff on webtoons.com in the English-speaking world is so huge that it will take us a while to reckon with. Like, that will profoundly change things in the next several years, you know, in a way that I don't think people are thinking or talking about.
Right.
Of course, as it profoundly changes things, Webtoon will just become more and more grotesque and exploitative and destroy the medium in the industry in its own ways in parallel.
Yes.
But there's something changing, you know.
I could see that. I mean, we've kind of seen this before. I remember there were quite a few years when the YA graphic novels were really taking off, and it was Raina Telgemeier's books who were topping the New York Times list, but the New York Times wasn't printing it because it was a kid's book. I feel like perhaps that might be what's brewing with Webtoon right now.
And I think it's a much wider span of ages of people reading on that, reading there now too. This is a weird fucking platform. I use it. I used their Canvas, you know, the part of that platform where you aren't signing a contract with them.
Gotcha.
And it's access to a kind of an audience that I otherwise would not have access to, and a type of familiarity with the medium that is totally alien to me, but it's kind of fun.
No, I mean, I totally appreciate that. Like, you have to venture into those places because otherwise, like, how are those people going to find you?
Yeah, because otherwise my audience is entirely exactly my age, basically.
Right. And that never gets bigger. You're not going to expand your audience that way. So I totally understand. You know.
On that, so do you want to continue?
Oh, no, go ahead.
On that, I wonder how much crossover there has been, or has this felt entirely like starting from scratch in terms of an audience, or
in
what?
some ways it is. I mean, every day there are people who are just finding out that I make games at all, and making a game is kind of like writing a novel, like in terms of what you're asking people to commit to, and you know, there are people who just want Octopus Pie, and they just, even if I made a new comic, they wouldn't be interested. And that's totally okay. I feel that way about a lot of artists too. There are people who've followed me across mediums, and I feel like those are, you know, those true gold fans we used to talk about in comics, your 1,000 true ones. But it's also kind of just, you know, fortunate that they happen to like the next thing that I was doing. They can't be expected to, and I certainly don't rely on that core audience. I'm very much focused on attracting people who have never heard of anything I've done before, or would never make the connection unless I made it for them.
Reading through a bunch of old comments on Octopus Pie, it is wild how people's the types of engagement are very different. There's a lot of people who just get, and I've seen this, you know, in relationships to a lot of different media. There's people who just get fixated on like stuff that's happening and like particular characters and particular like interpersonal ships and things in a way that seems not more broadly committed in your work or your project or whatever. No offense, you know, it's just there's very different ways of engaging. It's interesting to see.
I mean, I think I know what you're talking about, that people don't always engage with the work the way I actually intended for them to. They kind of make their own thing out of it. And I actually think, like, yes, there is quite a bit of that in the comments, but I think by and large, Octopus Pie never had that critical mass of fandom that sort of overwhelmed what I was doing with it.
I see.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? Where they never really took it away from me. They kind of allowed me to steer it. And I've kind of puzzled over that for years, like why exactly that was. Why wasn't there people drawing fan art and kind of coming up with their own scenarios and just sort of the critical mass of people that you saw in fandoms in like the 2000s and the 2010s for like Homestuck and stuff. I mean, obviously there's a lot of people reading Homestuck, but for a comic like like Lackadaisy, where there's just like the absolutely just die hard commitment to the characters and the world that I think practically overwhelms the original creation with its enthusiasm and its scope. Never
I
any.
wonder, I saw little bits of that in the old comments. It's interesting because you reserialized the thing 10 years after initially drawing it or something like that. Mm-hmm. And so you can see on your site still, this is a real cool thing that you still have this up there. You can see
the old comments
from both of these parallel tracks and seeing the type of literacies that are just present in 2008 or whatever, very different from those present 10 years later.
Yeah.
And there are little bits of that fandom attention. People will expect the characters to act in a more fandom way. They'll lose sight of the fact that you're telling a big considered story with like themes, and they'll fixate on these little pedantic things that obviously are not of interest to you.
Yes.
But like that's the sort of thing that a fandom, I'm being too abstract, but it's the sort of logic that could grow into that type of fandom that would take it away from you, as you say.
Yeah. And it never did. And I'm still kind of puzzling over exactly what happened there. Part of me has thought for years that I, as a creator, hold people at a distance, and that it had something to do with that like the way I present the characters, I'm not giving them everything I'm not giving the reader everything they need to know to do that with them.
Interesting.
Or I'm not giving them everything about myself and my intentions, and they just don't have enough to grab onto it that way. But I don't know if that's it. Like,
I don't know that that's it, because I mean, you give a lot, and the ways that you don't give the detail and context for the characters, for instance, are pretty in line with just general like good sort of show don't tell storytelling. I don't think you're doing anything too wild or The thing that sticks out to me is that maybe it's just that it's not a flashy genre thing in the way that like Homestuck is. It's not very nerd cultural in the way that Homestuck is. You know what I mean? Like maybe you're not. Maybe you weren't talking as directly to that sort of crowd at the time or something.
I mean, that could be it. I always felt like what I was talking about was a little bit alienated from the nerd culture at large.
Yes, you don't say. Yes.
I was talking about people hanging out and having fun, and when I think about it now, like the characters in Octopus Pie are almost never on the internet or playing video games or even watching TV. They're almost exclusively wandering around the city and hanging out with each other and doing things that are not necessarily like part of a nerd culture.
Yeah, drinking and casual sex and what have you.
Yes, so maybe it's that they're cool. Maybe that's the reason.
I mean, reading through enormous amounts of comments from 10, 15 years ago sort of gave me that impression that that's a part of it. Not to be too rude.
You know, we can be a little rude to them now. It's been years.
Oh, no. Oh, I'm not going in there. Can't you read the sign?
Come on, Cedric. There might be something important in here.
Go if you want to. I'll wait here.
So the thing ended in 2017, is that right?
Yes.
And then you've done 2 in the past couple years.
Mm-hmm.
But like concurrent with doing video game stuff, you've done 2 little epilogues.
Yes.
You've not done, have you done any fucking comics of your own that aren't within that Octopus Pie continuity?
No, not in a really long time, unless it was like for work. I did like a couple little freelance projects, and I did Adventure Time comics in around like 2014 or so, 2015. I did that for a couple of years. But other than that, no, I haven't done any original comics with anything other than Octopus Pie because, like I said, these are the characters with which I explore the world. They all have some part of me, and I can arrange them like little pieces on a chessboard and move them in a fashion that is consistent with my own thoughts and how my life is going.
Yeah. I do want to talk about the epilogues in particular, but that's interesting that you say that because like that feels like this feels like a philosophical difference in just how you and I have happened to approach comics and storytelling or whatever. Like you're I've always wanted to make like a structure, like a graphic novel, you know, and the motivating thing for you has obviously been these characters, and it's exciting to see you improvise with them and see how they take shapes that you didn't foresee and stuff. It feels kind of like a more honest engagement with like serialized storytelling than I have ever really done. It's cool to see. I feel like I could see that in reading it, that's the fundamental unit to you, the characters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you feel like you're building something larger, just brick by brick, and releasing it at the pace that you can go with it.
Yeah, well, it's not exactly like brick by brick executing a plan, you know. But just the unit to me, the indivisible unit, is like the big structured story. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But I am trying to foreground the more character improvisation serial thing now more than I ever have. And that's been fruitful. But okay, so these are the little characters that you use in your head to explore ideas. What is it like to return to that years after finishing the comic? Go.
Okay. All right. Well, the pandemic comic, it kind of like, I feel like I was thinking about that story for years before the pandemic even hit. I would kind of think, you know, I'd go through phases where I would think about the characters and I'd be like, all right, what the fuck are they up to? And I would kind of just in my, you know, basically just for my own knowledge, try to understand where these characters would be at right now as they age with me. And the story, you know, I went through it a few times, and it clearly wasn't ready. And when the pandemic hit, it was like that was the necessary component that was missing. And I think with the characters now, where they're at, and like where I've been able to tell their stories in their 30s, I really do need a little bit of time to see what the story is. And, you know, the pandemic kind of just like, that was the big story of the age. And I felt like everything that I wanted to say about it, all of the pain that I wanted to express and the alienation I wanted to express, could be done through these characters. And, you know, it's sort of like, you know, there's like a distant dreamy quality to it. Like, you know, like perhaps I'm living totally free. the confines of all this by living in a van, or perhaps I'm homeless and struggling on my own. Our relationships with our families and our dependency on one another. All of this was kind of just like building into the story over the course of a couple of years. And it really came to a head there. I by the time I was ready to do it, I was completely worked up into a froth over it. I couldn't think about anything else. And I had found such meaning in it, and I needed it to exist so immediately that I couldn't even wait for my colorist to finish coloring it. I needed to release it because I recognized, I think in hindsight correctly, that when the vaccine came, everything changed, and the story I was telling was about specifically a period in time where we were all dealing with this, and there was no certainty of when it would end or if it would end. So I was kind of furiously working on that one. It was sort of just a reconciliation of all those feelings in that time.
It's interesting. I read that as soon as it came out. It's interesting to read it now because it's kind of locked in a particular moment in the pandemic that is still pretty clear to me, but it's a little difficult to imagine now.
Yeah,
but how fucking cool though for you to have these characters that are so clear to you and an audience over the course of these years and years and years that you can just drop into this, that can express a thing within this totally new context in such a vibrant way. That's so different from like deciding to start a graphic novel about the pandemic from scratch. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I remember people saying that it was comforting to them to see their characters who they loved wearing those masks and being in a Zoom party with each other. Maybe that's what I was looking for too. Just a little bit of company with my old friends in this reality that we were in. But yeah, it's a little hard to wrap my head around what they were going through now, and in particular, the idea that that Hannah and Larry, who are like kind of distantly falling in love, would actually be worried about touching each other. that it would almost seem a little dangerous, which would almost maybe seem a little bit hot. Like, I don't know if you can recreate something like that anymore.
Yeah. And it's so, we've all lived through this weird invisibilizing of a lot of memory of that period. It's a weird, that fucking Hannah and Larry thing in that epilogue probably the most emotionally affecting thing to me of the whole fucking comic when I was reading it recently. Incredible fucking moment.
That's awesome.
Really got me. Really had the whole, man, I don't know. Yeah, you do feel attached to them after spending so much time with them as a reader. There were a couple other instances throughout the thing where you are talking about things happening in history in an extremely short turnaround. Like there's that Occupy Wall Street moment.
Yes.
Where you were responding in the moment in a way that's like still embedded in the ongoing story of the characters, but is talking about something happening in the world. That's fucking so cool.
I'm glad that story, like, as far as I can remember, it pretty much holds up. Occupy ended up being this thing that, like, sent waves through like the next decade or two of, people's like political activism, and it's like the thing that people say charged them in in a crucial moment in their lives. So I'm glad that it ended up being something that was worth talking about. And then it ends with the park getting swept. So I couldn't have really like that happened like 2 days before I drew the strip. So I couldn't have even really anticipated where that story was going to go as I was drawing it. It really is so immediate. And
It's
it's
so fucking cool. I could not have, I've never done anything that's so fucking cool, man. I don't know that you were able to do that in that way. I'm talking over you. I'm sorry.
it's okay. No, it's great that it's great that it worked. When I consider like how that was happening, and I was also working out like, you know, how it related to what they were all going through, and that I didn't have to like take them outside too far outside of themselves to place them in that setting.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways like that where the lightness on your feet really feels like an asset. So, but there was another, what was the other, the Sean's wedding
Yes.
epilogue thing?
Yes.
When was that?
That was 2022. I made that. And that one was even longer. That was like, I think that was like 60 pages.
What made you do that one?
All right, let me think. I got to think for a minute there. What
It's
inspired?
less of a frantic obsessive thing then.
Yeah, definitely less of a frantic obsessive thing. I think, you know, my sense of the sense of urgency around that one was simply not what it was during the madness of the pandemic. But I definitely latched on very strongly to a few themes and ideas in that story. I'm trying to think what they were. I mean, it was the first story where I really talked about marriage and what it is to be in a relationship that is I think, you know, it's worth talking about the distinction between, like, you know, what the characters were doing in their 20s and the way that they are depending on each other now, you know, what they owe to each other now. And, you know, the idea that that by committing yourself very strongly and for a long time to another person, you could the consequences are so much deeper than wasting a few years of each other's lives. Like they could you know, depending on which character you're looking at, it could just be like a matter of like, well, this the raw passion that inspired this relationship has been replaced by like such a deep and all-consuming responsibility for each other that we barely have time to fuck anymore. And you know, on the other end of the spectrum, Marigold and Jane, where Marigold's basically accusing Jane of murder because she has wasted years of her life and is not giving her what she wants.
Stressful relationship.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people took that a lot of different ways, and had varying levels of optimism and pessimism about it. I don't know that the consensus around that one was I don't know that there was a consensus around that one. I think it was a little bit more misinterpreted than the pandemic story. I don't like to get in there and explain it, but I suppose it's been 2 years, so I can say how I feel about it. But what did I want to say? The relationship that spurs that story, which is Hannah and Larry basically picking up from where they left off, living in a van together in the Garden of Eden. You know, realizing what is going to suck about this relationship, and basically agreeing to go their separate ways before committing to each other forever. And some people took this to be like a timeline out of order. Some people thought that there's no way that two people can have such a terrible fight and then and then spend their lives together. But to me, that was the whole basis of it. That is the reality of it. Beyond this, all we had seen was this distant longing, and up until this moment, and now we see what these two people who we know are like the rabble rousers of the group, driving each other absolutely insane, driving each other to the brink, and they still want to be together, and that's really, I think, what I was trying to get at, and I don't know that everybody saw it as optimistically as I did, but I wrote that story with a lot of optimism, and with the sense that like these relationships are not they are not perfectly blissful. They are causing each other misery, and yet this is right and good. This is actually like they've all turned out okay, and it's okay that they're making each other miserable to some extent because they're finding meaning in their lives together.
Mm-hmm. I mean, some people are just not going to. I stress about that a lot. That's sort of like readers picking up on things in exactly the way that I want.
Mm-hmm.
But it feels productive to give up on the stress at some point, especially if you're very, your show don't telly, you're not very explainy in your storytelling. So these, it communicates extremely well to the people that it communicates to, I feel.
Mm. Yeah, I hope so. I was really hoping people would write more about that one so I could like really see if they got into the nitty gritty of what I was trying to say. But
people don't engage. You published that in 2022. People had stopped engaging in that sort of high context way with art on the internet. I feel like by then, am I wrong?
Yeah, I think for the most part, yeah. I mean, there were a couple of posts about it, but by and large, I feel like most people were just like, I loved this, and that's all they gave me, and I was like, I was left hungry for that kind of analysis that I really wanted. I saw people saying like I could write pages and pages about this, and I'm like, well, why don't you?
Is that a thing? Is that something that has motivated you in the past? Like you want specific feedback and interpretation?
Yeah, I mean, I really do want to hear people express in their own words what they got out of it. I feel like that is helpful to me because I don't get to hear it put another way unless they do that. So I always find that sort of completes the circle for me when I give my work to somebody else and then they reflect it back to me in their own words. That's really what I want.
I get that. I get that shit kind of embarrasses me. I I appreciate it, but it feels like I get really like it feels inappropriate for me to read it or something. But I can see how that could be. I see what you mean, I think. Oh shit, what was I going to say? Yeah, it's a shame that it feels like I started a Discord for my new comic, and that's been a place where there is some high context discussion, but outside of that, it feels like a lot of the ways that people talk has gotten a lot lower resolution over the past, 15 years or whatever.
Yeah, I like the way I like how you're describing it that way. It's it definitely feels that way. It's just like a shitty image, like a meme that has just been like downscaled with like shitty artifacts way too many times. And I feel like a lot of the time you get the same feedback for something. You don't get like this nice, sculpture of thoughts, like it all just kind of like it's all just kind of the same flat thing. I feel that for sure.
Yeah, it's sad. I mean, I want to make a fucking podcast to get into the shit at great length because I don't see that very much. So there's that.
Yes. No, I this is what I believe in now. I believe in long form media. You know, for one thing, you don't really need to be highly self-conscious about long form media because none of the people who want to get mad at you are going to sit through 5 hours of audio to find the thing that they're mad at you about. So, like, I've found it's good for me to sort of untrain that fear that being on social media for so many years instilled in me. And, you know, the other thing about social media is you can never get beyond the 101 analysis of any particular topic. You can't get into it at all. It's always like I don't know if you ever were on Reddit, but you know, there was a while where I would look at subreddits of like my hobbies, and I'd be like, oh, I'm learning so much from reading this. And then after like a few weeks of it, I'd be like, oh man, but like new people keep coming in and asking the same questions and getting the same answers. This never advances. There's no advanced version of this. It's always like new people are coming in and asking the same questions all the time.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it like that. That absolutely is the mechanism. I guess that's why there's such a thing as like schools and like structured long-term classes and things of that nature.
Yeah. Yes. And I am personally interested in that now. And I'm interested in deep dives and long form essays and places where ideas are deeply explored. I am not interested in microblogging and you know, the forms that specifically encourage you know, a shallow approach.
But okay, end of parenthetical. Again, I'm sorry to focus so much on a comic that you made years and years ago that isn't what you're working on now. But
it's okay.
But it's like, you know, it's the area that we have in common, and it's the area that I understand more.
No, it's totally fine. I mean, I do like talking about it. It's actually probably best that I do have a little distance from it because I can actually look at what it was rather than like what I thought it was in the moment, which is definitely a different thing. I should probably brush up on my own comics a little bit. I feel like it's been a few years since I actually looked at them. So I feel like I should do what you did and look at them again.
It's incredible, man. I mean, just the way that serialization works in it, the way that you're exploring and, you know, trying out new things and shit. It's like, it's a fucking great work. I cannot stress that enough.
Thank you so much.
One thing I was going to say, shit. Yeah, the 2 hours is about as long as I can keep my verbal brain together, probably. And that's our show. Incidental audio throughout is from Daniel Kobelarz's soundtrack to Perfect Tides, also from the game King's Quest V, and from a couple of Captain Beefheart songs. The closing thing here, as usual, is from the OVA Ryo Kunohara Labyrinth. A thing I neglected to mention is that the adjunct faculty at the School of Visual Arts in New York City, that is all faculty, are in the process of attempting to unionize. This is the school that I teach a class at and that Meredith several years ago taught the same class at. We just recently hit a majority of faculty in support of this effort. We are trying to make noise about it and get more and more of the enormous number of teachers at this school to sign a card in support of it. A thing I'm doing, maybe the way in which I have been able to be most helpful so far, is running some social media accounts. If you're on Instagram, please consider following SVAFACUAW. I've been posting some cute little graphics of teachers and their testimonials in support of the effort. Okay, thank you for listening. I'll do another one sometime soon. Have a good day.
Don't stop now. Go on.